そこ。
Hey guys, Morpheus Christus here. In today's video I will be responding to Dennis Prager and his video What's the Difference Between Socialism, Fascism and Communism? For anyone interested in watching the whole thing without commentary, you can find the original video in the description box. If you don't know who Dennis Prager is, he's a Jewish-American radio host and writer. In 2009 he co-founded the Prager University Foundation, or PragerU for short, which is basically a right-wing non-profit organization which specializes in producing short-form conservative and pro-capitalist media content on YouTube. The reason I'm making this response is to not only debunk his misconceptions of socialism, but additionally I figured I could use this video as an opportunity to further explore the true meaning of communism and why I believe we have yet to see a society which is truly communistic. But without any further ceremony, here is Dennis Prager.
My name's Heather, I'm from Los Angeles. I just wanted to get your thoughts and explanation on the differences between socialism, fascism, and communism, especially with this last election cycle. I feel like we saw those words thrown around a lot, but I just wanted to know, what exactly are the differences between those three?
So the words are thrown around. That is largely true. And they've taken on a life of their own. I'll tell you what they really mean, and I'll tell you what they mean in usage. Not the same thing. So let's see. Fascist, socialist, communist. Okay. So fascist is what left-wingers use to describe everyone who's anti-left. Stalin introduced the idea that if you oppose the left, you're a fascist. Basically, if you oppose me, the leading leftist, you're a fascist. So fascist became the term that anyone anti-left was called to the American elections at this day, or even in Europe.
While there is some partial truth to this statement, as fascism itself is a far-right and anti-left ideology, this mediocre definition only scratches the surface as to what fascism actually is. I would personally define fascism as a far-right, pseudo-nationalist, authoritarian belief system with its most notable characteristic being its top-down dictatorial-style governments. Under fascism, basic human rights like democracy, free speech, freedom of religion, property rights, and individual interests, among a myriad of other things, are essentially suppressed and subordinated by the state. Fascism, in short, is a far-right ideology. It is not, as Dennis erroneously stated in his video, this whimsical strawman term coined by so-called leftists like Stalin, whom, by the way, was also a fascist.
What is a fascist? Fascist is essentially ultra-nationalist, anti-democratic, authoritarian regime. Okay, so Italy had it. They used the term first. Fascism comes from an Italian word. Mussolini was the obvious example. Hitler was a fascist, but Hitler was really a Nazi. Nazism was a more severe form because Nazism introduced what is not necessarily part of fascism, racism. Nazism was race-based fascism, whereas for Mussolini, fascism was just fascism. Mussolini, to the best of my knowledge, was not particularly an anti-Semite, for example, but Hitler was, of course, the great Jew hater of all time. So fascism is the ultra-nationalist, authoritarian government. It suppresses democracy, and it is ultra-nationalist, among other things, but those are the major ones. So,
correct. However, I strongly disagree with labeling fascists as ultranationalists. Nationalism actually originated from the left during the French Revolution, which in turn led to the publication of the Declaration of the Rights of Man. This document in question would later go on to serve as the preamble of the first French Constitution in 1791. Nationalism, by and large, is the rejection of authoritarianism and monarchy in favor of democracy, or a country which is governed by the people as opposed to an unelected oligarchic elite. Additionally, a nation is a collective of people who share a common language, culture, history, and traditions. Nationalism has nothing to do with imperialism, racism, jingoism, or any form of exclusion based off of one's immutable characteristics. These things are all aspects of what I describe as pseudo-nationalism, a belief system which was artificially created to divide and rule working class people for the benefit of the ruling elite or bourgeoisie, as Marx would call them.
So both socialist and communist, they're on the left. Socialist is one who believes in socialism. Obviously, socialism is a bigger and bigger government, where the government takes care of the social order, if you will. The bigger the government, the more likely you are to head towards socialism. But socialism does not abolish mom and pop stores. You could still keep Dennis's pizza parlor open under a socialist government. But generally speaking, they will nationalize big things. The railroads, the oil industry, et cetera, et cetera. Communist allows no free enterprise whatsoever. When I visited the Soviet Union, there wasn't a single private restaurant. All you had was restoran, which is Russian for restaurant. And that's all. Or a place that sold bread would say chleb, which is bread in Russian. Not Vladimir's chleb joint, just chleb, because it was owned by the state.
No, socialism, at least in the true sense of the word, does not advocate for this Orwellian nanostate, as you and other right-wingers often portray it as. Karl Marx was explicitly anti-authoritarian and anti-statist. His vision for communism was a classless, worker-owned society where everyone received their fair share. There is nothing implicitly or explicitly authoritarian about communism, as it is essentially democracy in its truest form. The so-called communist regimes of the 20th century were fascist. The end goal of fascism, as with all other right-wing ideologies, is neo-feudalism. Neo-feudalism is an umbrella term I came up with to describe right-wing ideologies and ideologues who openly proclaim themselves to be pro-worker and pro-democracy in order to manipulate the people they want to influence into accepting the very tyranny they believe they were fighting against. Basically, neo-feudalists are people who want to bring back feudalism, which was a hierarchical system of government in which the church appointed rulers of a kingdom and the rulers themselves would appoint landlords to own the land. These feudal landlords would then rent the land to the peasants. Peasants under feudalism had little rights and worked tedious back-breaking labor in exchange for food, shelter, and security. For a full in-depth explanation of neo-feudalism, I recommend you watch my What is Neo-Feudalism video, but I digress. In the Soviet Union, for instance, many of its leaders like Lenin, Stalin, Khrushchev, etc. may have ostensibly proclaimed themselves as pro-worker and pro-communist when in actuality they were only in it for themselves and their elite cronies. To the elites, working-class people were nothing more than an expendable appendage to be whipped and exploited by the bourgeoisie. Communist is a suppression of essentially all individuality because of the belief that everybody should end up in the same place. It's not for equality, it's for equity. Equality is opportunity, equity is result. The left in America is very close to communist in that view. Communism, as described by Marx, is about collective ownership over the means of production, meaning that businesses, such as restaurants, bakeries, and grocery stores, should be democratically owned by the people who work there and managed via worker councils and assemblies. This system of collective management is called a worker cooperative. While the USSR may have ostensibly called itself communist, it was only that in name, only as evidenced by the generic blandness described in Dennis's anecdote. Under Soviet fascism, there were no cooperatives. All businesses were essentially extensions of a centralized bureaucracy which benefited the elites. For more information on the history of the Soviet Union, check out my documentary, Bolshevism Unmasked. Finally, to address Dennis's ludicrous definition of communism, no, communism is not the suppression of individuality. It is not state ownership of the means of production, and it is certainly not a fascist dictatorship. These are all right-wing distortions meant to discredit the aims of true socialists. I find it comical the way Dennis equivocates liberalism as a radical ideology, when in truth liberals are moderate centrists. When was the last time you've heard of individuals like Cenk Uygur or Bernie Sanders openly advocate for demilitarizing America, abolishing capitalism, redistribution of land to African and Native Americans, or for the balkanization of the American empire? You haven't, because liberals are not radical leftists as right-wingers proclaim. They are centrists who want to moderately reform the American empire in order to continue reaping the benefits associated with their class privileges. An overthrow of America would at the end of the day go against their best interests. The same principle also applies to fascists and other right-wing American ideologues. But with that said, this is Morpheus Christus, signing off.
Well, my vision for a really great American future is a country that renounces military power, a country that decides it is not going to use violence against other countries in the world in order to extend, its power in the world. I think of a country that will concentrate on using its enormous wealth to help people. That will no longer have this huge military budget, that will have free health care for all, free food. Yes, everybody is entitled to fundamental things, and I think of a country that is rich enough to give everybody all these things, health care and decent housing and work and so on. A country that will be respected by people all over the world instead of, as now, very often feared by people all over the world.